What a powerful journey Nathan went through. From being abandoned in the cold to proving that love and resilience can change everything. But now, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We love seeing how far our stories travel. And don't forget, a brand new special story is coming tomorrow. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss it. See you in the next chapter. She found a baby in the trash. What happened next shocked everyone. On a cold winter night in downtown Chicago, the streets were eerily silent, covered in a thick layer of snow. The wind howled between the towering buildings, cutting through the darkness like a sharp blade. In the back seat of a sleek black car, William Carter sat with his arms crossed, his face emotionless. Beside him, his wife, Olivia, clutched a silk scarf to her chest, her hands trembling. Neither of them spoke, but the weight of their decision pressed down on them like a heavy stone. The baby lay bundled in a thin blanket, his tiny breaths barely visible in the freezing air. His face, so delicate, so innocent, was marked by something neither of his parents could accept, a large red birthmark stretching across his cheek and down his neck. Olivia had refused to hold him from the moment she saw him in the hospital. She had screamed, sobbed, and begged for another explanation, but there was none. The doctor had assured them it was harmless, just a birthmark, but to Olivia, it was a curse, a stain that would forever taint their family's perfect image. "We can't keep him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. William's jaw tightened as he stared out the window. "I know." He tapped the glass, signaling their driver, John Reynolds, to stop. The car slowed to a halt at the entrance of a dimly lit alleyway. Without hesitation, John stepped out, opened the door, and reached for the child. The baby stirred, his tiny fingers twitching as if sensing what was about to happen. "Do it quickly," William ordered, his tone cold and final. John hesitated for only a moment before carrying the baby toward the alley. The wind howled louder, as if protesting the cruel act. He found a spot beside a dumpster, where the walls blocked most of the wind. Gently, he placed the baby down, his heart pounding. He wasn't a kind man, but even he knew this was wrong. Still, orders were orders. As he walked back to the car, he didn't look back. The engine roared to life, and in seconds, they were gone. Left behind in the silent alley, the baby shivered, his tiny body barely moving. The only sound was the distant wail of the wind and the soft, uneven breaths of a child who had just been thrown away like trash. Maggie Sullivan pulled her coat tighter around her as she shuffled through the dark alley, her breath visible in the freezing Chicago air. At 62, life had not been kind to her. She spent her nights collecting bottles and cans, hoping to scrape together enough change for a warm meal. The city was brutal to the poor, but she had learned to survive. She was about to move on when a strange sound stopped her, a faint, almost inaudible whimper. Maggie froze, her tired eyes scanning the alley. It was late, and most people avoided places like this, especially in the dead of winter. But the sound came again, weaker this time. Her heart pounded as she turned toward a pair of dumpsters near the wall. Something was there. Slowly, with trembling hands, she bent down and pulled back a torn piece of cloth. Her breath caught in her throat. A baby. He was impossibly small, his tiny body wrapped in nothing but a thin, frayed blanket. His skin was ice cold, his lips nearly blue from the Chicago winter. Maggie's chest tightened. Who would abandon a child like this? Then she saw it. The birthmark. A large red stain covered one side of his face, stretching down his neck like a cruel reminder of the rejection he had suffered. Maggie had seen many things in her life, but this was pure cruelty. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice cracking as she carefully lifted him into her arms. He barely stirred, his breathing shallow. For a terrifying moment, she thought she was too late. Pressing his fragile body against her chest, she wrapped her worn coat around him, trying to transfer whatever warmth she had left. She had no plan, no money, nowhere to go except the rundown apartment she barely managed to afford. But she couldn't leave him here. Maggie forced her aching legs to move, stepping out of the alley and into the deserted street. A few blocks away, neon lights flickered from a 24-hour diner, the only sign of life in the frozen city. She tightened her grip on the baby and kept walking. She had no idea how she would take care of him. But one thing was certain, this child had already been thrown away once. She wouldn't let it happen again. The small apartment was barely warm, even with the old space heater humming weakly in the corner. Maggie sat on the edge of her worn out couch, cradling the baby in her arms. His tiny fingers twitched against her chest, his breath shallow but steady. She had spent most of the night holding him close, afraid that if she let go, the cold would take him away. She had nothing to give him. No crib, no bottles, not even a name. But she whispered softly as she rocked him, trying to soothe the fragile life she had just rescued. "You're not alone anymore, sweetheart," she murmured. "I won't let anything happen to you." The hours passed, and just as the first pale light of morning crept through the cracked window, the baby stirred. His dark, round eyes blinked open, staring up at her. Maggie felt her heart squeeze. "Matthew," she whispered. "I'll call you Matthew." And just like that, he was hers. Raising him wasn't easy. The world outside their apartment wasn't kind, and neither were the people in their building. As Matthew grew, the stares started. Long, judgmental looks from neighbors, whispers behind their backs. By the time he was 6, it was impossible to ignore. Maggie saw it every time she walked him outside. At the grocery store, the clerk barely acknowledged them. At the pharmacy, the owner whispered to an employee while glancing at Matthew's face. People avoided standing too close. Mothers pulled their children away, and kids at the park whispered cruel things when they thought Matthew couldn't hear. But the worst was school. On his first day, Maggie dressed him in a second-hand uniform she had saved up for, smoothing his hair down with a proud smile. But when they arrived, the moment they stepped through the school gates, the whispers started. A boy pointed. A mother gasped. Matthew shrank beside her, gripping her hand tightly. That night, after she had tucked him into bed, she found him sitting in the dark, staring at the floor. "Grandma," he whispered, "why doesn't anyone like me?" Maggie's heart broke. She had no answer, only the promise she had made that cold night in the alley. No matter what, she would never abandon him. Matthew stopped asking questions after that night. He no longer asked why people stared at him. He no longer reached out to the other kids at school, hoping for a friend. Instead, he learned to keep his head down, to walk quickly past the cruel whispers and the pointing fingers. But Maggie saw the change in him. He used to have this bright energy, this curiosity about the world, even when it wasn't kind to him. But now, he was quiet, withdrawn. He spent more time inside their tiny apartment, sitting by the window, staring at the gray Chicago skyline. She hated seeing that light in his eyes fade, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't protect him from the world outside. Then one day, she found him drawing. It started with a few old pencils she had picked up from a thrift store. Matthew sat on the floor, scribbling on scraps of newspaper, on the backs of envelopes, on anything he could find. At first, it was just random shapes, little lines and swirls. But soon, the shapes became faces, buildings, stories. His drawings weren't ordinary. They were raw, full of emotion, of loneliness, of pain, but also of something else. Hope. Maggie watched in quiet awe as he lost himself in his art. It was the first time in months that he looked free. One afternoon, she took him for a walk past the marketplace near their building. Among the vendors selling food and clothes, there were artists, men and women with easels, painting the city in bold strokes of color. Matthew stopped in his tracks, watching them with wide eyes. The next morning, Maggie took his drawings and carefully laid them out on a small patch of sidewalk near the market. At first, people walked past without a second glance. Then, a man stopped. He was older, dressed in a sharp suit, with an air of someone important. He picked up one of Matthew's sketches, studying it with quiet intensity. "Who drew this?" he asked. Maggie swallowed. "My grandson." The man looked down at Matthew, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. "There's something special here," he said. "I run a gallery not far from here. I'd like to showcase his work." Maggie's breath caught. For the first time in his life, someone wasn't turning Matthew away. They were finally seeing him. Matthew's first art exhibit was supposed to be small, just a few paintings tucked into a corner of Greg Thompson's gallery in downtown Chicago. But something unexpected happened. People didn't just glance at his work and move on. They stopped. They stared. They felt something. His paintings weren't just pictures. They were stories. Stories of pain, of rejection, of a world that had tried to push him into the shadows. But more than that, they were stories of hope. Within days, every piece sold. Matthew, now 12 years old, couldn't believe it. He had spent his whole life being ignored, avoided, even feared. Now, strangers were paying hundreds then thousands of dollars for his art. They wanted to know more about the boy behind the paintings. News articles started popping up. His story spread. The abandoned child who became a rising artist. For the first time, Matthew felt something he had never known before: acceptance. But not everyone was happy about his success. One day, as Maggie was helping him pack up new artwork for the gallery, there was a knock at the door. She opened it, and there they stood, William and Olivia Carter, his biological parents. They looked different than he remembered, older, colder, but their presence still sent a chill through him. Olivia forced a smile, stepping forward. "Matthew," she said softly, as if the name belonged to her. "We've been looking for you." He said nothing. "We're your parents," William added. "We made mistakes, but—" "No," Matthew interrupted, his voice steady. "You're not my parents." Olivia's smile faltered. William's jaw tightened. "I have only one mother," Matthew said, turning toward Maggie, "and she never left me." Silence. They had come expecting to reclaim him, to use his success to fix their image. Instead, they were nothing to him, just ghosts from a past he had already erased. After they left, Maggie squeezed his hand. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Matthew looked at her and smiled, a real smile. "Yes," he said. "For the first time, I am." That night, he hung a new painting on the wall of their home. It was of Maggie, painted in warm golden hues. Underneath, he wrote one simple sentence: "My mother, the woman who saved me." Matthew's story is one of resilience, love, and the power of never giving up, even when the world tries to push you down. From being abandoned in the freezing streets of Chicago to becoming a celebrated artist, his journey proves that one act of kindness can change a life forever. But now, we want to hear from you. What part of Matthew's story moved you the most? Was it Maggie's unwavering love? The moment he discovered his talent for art? Or the way he stood up to the parents who once rejected him? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And tell us, have you ever faced a challenge that made you feel like an outsider? How did you overcome it? Your stories inspire us just as much as we hope ours inspire you. Also, let us know where you're watching from. It's incredible to see our community growing across the world. And don't forget, a brand new story is coming tomorrow. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.